Hey, welcome back to Road Tripping with Rachel. I'm Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me here on this road trip. If you'll notice, it is not Sunday and we missed our Advent upload. That is because my video did not work. I did not find out about it until later, and not only this one, but another one didn't load properly, so I'm now trying to refilm them like late. So y'all are gonna get like a little extra here coming up on the 23rd, and hopefully we'll pick back up with the 24th the way we're supposed to, because we're too close to Christmas for this just to kind of like go off the rails at this point. But today we've been going through our Advent study, and we have looked at systematic theology, biblical theology, and we've also looked at covenantal theology. Well, this week we were going to be looking at historical theology. Now, historical theology is really, I think of it as the very practical side of theology. It is looking primarily at how our theology has been developed throughout the course of history. Primarily, we look at this through the lens of like the inception of the church. So really, it starts at Jesus's ascension. And Pentecost is really where historical theology really picks up. Now, we see this is where like we're talking about the different creeds that have been written, the different councils. We're taking a look at history and what has actually happened throughout time, and how the different things that have been happening throughout history has influenced how the church approaches things, like in general, like societally, how we approach theology. And some of those is like when we're talking about the creeds were written mainly because we needed concise documents and statements about what the church believes, mainly to combat blasphemy and cultic heresies that were coming up during the time. And it is very important, like, to really understand that the church as a whole, culturally, the church, it has the ability to really be very distinctive based off of where it is geographically located. Now, I'm not saying that to say that Christianity, like our core truths, change. And I know you can't really see my hands, that our core truths change, but I guess the trappings and the decoration of it do change. And the way it is incorporated into society looks different based off of the culture in which you're going to find the church. So probably the best example I ever heard for this to kind of really explain it is if we were to look at like Catholicism, for example. Catholicism in Mexico looks very different from Catholicism in like Ireland. Now, at their core, like they are still the same. They're still doing the masses. It's still the same scriptures that are being read. It is still like there's still very much that unity, but there is a distinctive flavor to the Catholic Church in Mexico versus the Catholic Church that is in like Ireland. It does look different. We can even recognize it here, like even in art, like, we see some art and we're like, oh, that is very much Spanish. Or we'll see like, oh, that looks very German. Like there's just those distinctive things about different cultures that we just recognize as being something that's very culturally specific. And I think it's also important that we recognize, like, as we go through this, specifically because we're looking at, like, how these different approaches to theology really affect Christmas, is that the church also very intentionally, like, once it became a legal religion, it began to not so much adopt holidays and some of the things that were just a part of culture. Sorry, I'm letting my cat out. But it sought to replace them. So instead, like if we look at a calendar, there are a lot of religious holidays that would overlap with what would have traditionally been very pagan holidays, right? Like Halloween, for example. It's separate from Christmas, but that is one that, we can look at and we can see a very obvious example of that. Now, the as someone who is Protestant, I am not Catholic. Like Halloween doesn't really mean anything to me. All Hallows Eve doesn't really mean anything to me, from a religious standpoint. However, the concept of All Hallows Eve is related to saints now because of the influence of the Catholic Church, but it was meant to replace um, culturally a holiday that was very associated with like pagan religions. And in the same way, although we choose to celebrate Christmas and the birth of Christ, which is part of the religious calendar, the dates we chose to adopt were originally associated with some pagan traditions. Now, I've heard the argument, we've all heard the argument, why do you celebrate Christmas in December? Jesus probably wasn't born then. You're right, he probably wasn't born in December. One, because we use the Julian calendar. That is not what the Hebrew calendar uses. They use a lunar calendar, which is totally different. That's why Easter moves every year and Christmas stays the same. It's static. But with that, though, December 25th was Mithras. I believe it's Mithras. It was like supposed to be like his birthday, and it was one of those mystery religions like that were within the Roman Empire. And because you had so many people from Roman culture, regardless of their ethnicity, coming to Christ, they were familiar with those celebrations. So what the Christian church would really do would be they would say, okay, like culturally we all celebrate this anyway because they were in Roman culture, but we're going to change the meaning. So they didn't change the symbol, they changed the meaning of it. And we see that throughout history, that there are a lot of different times where there are still like dates or celebrations that are on the calendar that were initially like pagan holidays, but we have now changed the meaning to it. So like Samhain, Halloween, became associated with like a religious holiday. Now, if you're Protestant, it's also Reformation Day now, because October 31st was the day that Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses up on the church door of Wittenberg. So there is now like a different connotation that is with it. Likewise with Easter, Easter, because it's related to the lunar calendar and is therefore tied to like Jewish holidays, it's moving, but the concept of like, the eggs and chicks and rabbits and all that kind of stuff, that does relate back to pagan culture, because what else is in the spring? We have the spring equinox. Okay? Like, so that when we're looking at history and we're seeing like, well, why are we celebrating in December? It's because we took the symbol of what was initially a pagan holiday and we flipped it on its head and said, culturally we're all having a party anyway. Let's go ahead and instead of celebrating this, mysterious God that no one really knows anything about, let's make that where we're going to celebrate Jesus. And as Christianity spread, it became the core reason that we celebrated it then. So now there are very many people who are running around saying, I'm going to happy birthday Mithras. They're running around saying happy birthday Jesus. And now with like Christmas and a lot of the things that are now associated with it, a lot of those have come from primarily because like here in the United States, we're so informed by European culture, primarily because of the colonies, that, a lot of what we associate as being Christmas have now all come from a lot of the different cultural variations that have come from that. The Christmas tree is really German. The idea of having like ribbons and bows is very much like a British thing. Shortbread, Scottish. We have the idea of red and green is really tied to Catholicism with the liturgical calendar. So the singing Christmas carols, is very much tied to the early church about using music as a form of worship. A lot of those types of traditions have found themselves growing out of different cultures. And as we look at historical theology, we can pinpoint different cultures. Now, a lot of them, yes, they are Western, but we can pinpoint a lot of them and see how those different, we're going to say quirks, or pointers really have now changed like how we look at different things. I had to take historical theology classes, both in my undergrad and in my graduate studies. It was actually a lot of my favorite classes. Just if I were to pick a topic I just truly enjoy, I've always just enjoyed history. And this is one of those where I think we underutilize historical theology, especially right now. We tend to take things and we want to say like, well, this is how we've always done it. And realistically, no. A lot of what we see in the modern church has developed over time. And especially being here in both the Western church and specifically in the United States, we are a very young country. So a lot of what we tend to associate as being like the American church is not necessarily all informed by strong theology all the time. A lot of it is very much tied to politics. A lot of it is tied to nationalism. I know there's going to be some people who aren't going to like that, but there's very much a very distinctive nationalism that is tied to Christianity within the American church. That's not right. It shouldn't be that way. I have some opinions, but these are things that like we need to be aware of and recognize when we are seeing things like, okay, and it's okay to question these too, like in services and things like that, or when your pastor or even small groups are talking about it, are we associating like where we've come from historically? Are we looking at like a theological tenet? I don't want to give any major examples, but are we viewing that tenet through the lens of American Christianity, or are we viewing that tenet through the lens of this is what Scripture actually says about it? Are we viewing something because of our politics? Are we viewing something because of our socioeconomic level? And it's important to remember, I've talked about this in previous videos, but we're all going to come to Scripture with a bias, and I'm starting to get a little bit off track, so I'm going to reel it in, turning back to Christmas. So we celebrate Christmas in December because we replaced a pagan holiday with a religious one. And the religious holiday eventually overshadowed the pagan one, where that pagan one really isn't celebrated anymore. And some people would come back and say, well, what about Yule? Well, Yule is actually much more of a European thing. Specifically, we're talking not even really like super European. We're talking more like the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, Great Britain, Wales. We're talking more there, the idea of Yule, which is also the winter solstice. So actually at the time that we're filming this, like the winter solstice was this last weekend. So you can see where Christmas has replaced what has been traditionally like some pagan holidays many hundreds of years ago. And there are still some people out there that celebrate Yule today as well. But I know this one wasn't as like scripture heavy as some of the other ones are, but I think it was one of those that like we just really need to talk about and think, because this is one of those things, this is particularly one of those topics that we engage with like within the American culture and within the church, and understanding kind of like where that argument even comes from, I think is very, very important. You can't ever argue against something unless you understand that other side. And I think this was meant to kind of just give people the language to understand what is being talked about, and to encourage you to do your own research and to go in and look things up for yourself. And I do go a little bit more in depth if you want to go check out the website, www.roadtrippin'.com. So I hope to see you guys all next time as we are getting closer to Christmas, because this was the last Advent Sunday. So Christmas is actually this Thursday, and I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas if this is the only lessons that you have been joining me on. I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.